Alrighty, so here we are. I'd like you to take a moment to look around, yeah? Being in this room, number one, you are in this top 7% of the population that we have the privilege of being in an institution like this, a university, yeah? Let alone Macquarie University, as some of you may know, is in the top 2% in the world, yeah? So looking at this amazing place, we are quite privileged, yeah, to be in this situation. And you are all here today at this hackathon, and what are we doing? We're coming up with brand new ideas, innovative ideas that can forward industry, yeah? But, you know, this is not the whole story. I remember for my own university some years ago, I was sitting there reading just a textbook and thinking, wow, these ideas, they're amazing. Yeah, there's something that everybody should know about. And then I sat and looked at the date, and it was something like 30 years ago those ideas came to fruition, and yet it was not out there in the world, not being used at all. And as we dug into this, came into this further, the OECD did a report about how well Australia is at taking ideas like yours, yeah, that we're coming up with in this hackathon and putting it into industry, putting it into businesses and having people use it in their hands. And in short, the results are quite shocking. So this is the number of startup companies that come from research per $1 billion of effort and energy spent. And compared to Canada at 18 of those companies, Australia is at a mere 2. Secondly, we have that the firms collaborating on the innovation of higher research with companies and institutions. Australia is 3 out of 45 with Norway, you know, on the upper side. So what does this all mean? This means that at the moment we are not doing a great job at all, unfortunately, that the ideas that you are coming up with in your seats, they are not being innovated in a way that will be used in the industry, yeah? So this is something that in Engenesis we really care about. We are interested in making a difference for. And now some people call this innovation, yeah? You'll hear that word over and over again. Sometimes it's called commercialization. How do you take that idea and put it in the hands of people we call a market? And it can be a product, it can be a service, it could be a software as a service, a platform, and so on. We like to call it venture building, the process of taking one idea and understanding how it needs to work in society that people will pay for it, and then it can go, you know, it can go global, it doesn't have to, but it's used, you know, that genius, that piece of genius is used day in and day out. So today, this is what we're here to speak to you about. How do you take that idea and turn it into something that is used every day, you know, in the industry, day to day by people? It can be mums and dads, it could be shop owners, and so on. Now, the first point we like to make is that when somebody is interested in this, yes, you can do a business degree, but we know very well that a business degree alone doesn't mean you can go through this process, yeah? Secondly, for anyone who is interested in that, they go to the bookstore or the library, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of books for people to go through just to start to understand the process of how can you take these ideas, you know, and apply them to real life and turn it into a real commercialized venture. Let alone, who has ever seen a quote on the internet about entrepreneurship, just by show of hands, yeah? So I'm sure many of you over and over again, you see sayings like this saying, no one has ever achieved greatness by playing it safe. So we have this very interesting situation. We know that there are huge possibilities for where we can take these innovative ideas, yeah? Statistically, the fastest company that has gone from the idea started and then become a $1 billion company is, any estimates? Say that again? Uber, yeah. So Uber was quite fast, but it actually was not the fastest. It's actually 2 months, yeah. So we are seeing this huge acceleration of the ability to come up with ideas like you are doing here and turn them into companies that are doing very, very well, yeah. But with this flurry of all of these bombarding of ideas, we find that many people are just left there paralyzed and confused, right? Because do we go and build a product first? Do we go and do our sales and marketing first? Where do we actually start? And the fact of the matter is it's a very complex process. It's at least as complex as flying a plane. And at the moment, the rates of failure are 93% of these ventures being commercialized are failing out there, yeah? So this is giving you a bit of an idea of just what one entrepreneur would need to deal with when getting their company, off the ground. They need to deal with the operations, the administration, the marketing, the product development. The list goes on and on. And let's face it, in the traditional education setting, where they're just being trained on one of these, okay? So our job here today is to start to work with you to give you a bit of insight in what it takes to take these ventures from an idea stage out into the industry. Now, we know that not all of you are going to be wanting to lead your own Uber in the future or something like that, but we do believe that every single person needs to play their part in the new economy, right? In the transformation of these ideas into the world. Now, when we look at these levels of entrepreneurship and innovation, this is how we see it. 500 years ago, we had people sitting there. They would be doing surgery, and they would have doctors and scientists. They would cut people open, and they would try to manage their cancer. They didn't call it cancer back then, and then they would have this 90% rate of failure. Of course, right? They hardly knew what different organs were and so on. And somehow over 20 generations, over 500 years, the knowledge was passed down, different practices and training. And here we are today with a 20-year-old, by the time they're 26 or 28, they can slice someone open, remove the cancer at 90% plus success rates, yeah? So we believe that while we do acknowledge there's a huge rate of failure in innovation and entrepreneurship, we do not accept that. We don't think that we are at the upper limit for that, yeah? Now, to go about this journey, we know that we're not, in our lifetimes, we're probably not going to move the whole needle. But why we're here today is to start to empower, people like yourselves who have the ideas to understand how the process needs to happen as it goes out into the industry. Fantastic. Now, as part of this, we're going to be sharing with you the Engenesis framework. This is something that is, how do we think that things moved from the medical industry and scientific industry over 500 years ago? Well, one person didn't just come up and say, hey, I have all the answers, yeah? We managed to create systems and processes around the world where we started sharing knowledge, right? Someone in a particular industry could share the research that they had and they could pass it on to someone else. So this is what we are starting to do with what we call the Engenesis framework. We've trained 20-year veteran investors to use this, and then they start using them in their startup companies, all the way down to 19-year-olds who can start to assess businesses in the same way that those investors do. So we'll be sharing with these in our session with you today in the hope that you can see a helicopter view of what it takes to move these ideas into businesses, into industry, whether as an employee or as a business owner. And before I go on, we do use these terms a lot, such that they get so watered down that many people stop listening to them. So we would like to start with the word entrepreneur, yeah, or entrepreneurship. And we take from Jean-Baptiste in the 1800s, an economist, and he said that the entrepreneur shifts economic resources from an area of low yield and productivity into an area of high yield and productivity. Now, as you can see from this definition, you do not need to be the CEO of the business. You do not need to be the leader of the business to start having this entrepreneurial spirit, yeah? And so as we move on, through the years using technology, this is becoming more and more relevant because we need each team member to play their part, for us to have greater yield in what we're doing. So before we jump into sharing with you some of our insights in this process, just giving you a background of who we are. We are from Engenesis, and Engenesis works across many different companies across the Middle East, the Asia Pacific. We have a portfolio of companies that we directly build and grow, as well as working in a services and consulting capacity for corporates, SMEs, as they go through the innovation process. Now, typically it's from the idea of someone with an idea on a napkin, as you are starting here today, all the way up to $800 million companies who know the industry very well, but are coming up with new ideas about the next S-curve of innovation that they want to go about. So from that, we started to see across all of these different industries, there's no one vertical that we work in, everything from retail, hospitality, e-commerce, property. But as we kept going through and through, we would then need to be naive or blind not to see these repeated patterns of success and failure when it comes to innovating and commercializing. And that's what we want to share with you today. Because the fact of the matter is that of the dozens and dozens of innovators that we see every month, we find many of them are being inundated by that social media entrepreneurship, and they're having the complete wrong idea, leading to quite high levels of failure, such that at one point we had someone come in saying, hey, Engenesis, we've had $200,000 of our own money invested in our product. We've worked so hard, and it's 2 years later. And we just have one question for you guys. And we say, oh, what's that? How can we help? Please help us get our first customer. And we stopped. I mean, at the beginning, to be honest, our jaws dropped. We were saying, how can this happen? That you invested all of this money without even seeing if there's a demand, yeah? But as we went on, we saw that conversation come up again and again and again. We realized that we are in an epidemic where, while on one hand people have these great ambitions, we really need to upskill people through that process. So again, we're going to share we have a short time here with you today. We know that this is something that we're talking about. You might not apply it in the next day or two, but we do hope that from things like this hackathon, around the world, people run many hackathons, and it's not uncommon that an idea coming up here turns into a multi-billion-dollar company. Yeah, in fact, Airbnb was actually from that very, very origin story. So a bit more about, where this is just an idea of where we operate. I mean, if you've been here, I've seen some of your faces here. We've been supporting the Big Data Society and the hackathons for many years now. So we are very interested in how do we bridge these ideas in tertiary education and bring them into industry. We've then run training courses across corporate or for business owners across Sydney, Dubai, Singapore, as you can see here, Iran in Shiraz, yeah, and then also Tehran as well, yeah. And then, now, we're not saying that we're the only ones talking about this, because as I said with the books, there are many, many people, and they are very good intention, and they have very, very, very knowledgeable things to say. So this is, for example, Eric Ries. Has anyone heard of the Lean Startup, just by raise of hands? No? Yes, a couple of people. So this is a type of, required reading, we would say, if you were to go in to create your own venture. This is now used across many universities to share how startups grow. And then this is the US Shark Tank. So we're just sharing with you that this is over the last tens of years, we've been deeply interested in what the cutting edge people are saying about how do you invest in these companies, how do you grow these companies, and yet we still have this rate of failure. Such that there are reports that 75% of venture-backed startups fail. So I want you to pause for a second and think about that, because number one, out of all of the ideas that people are trying to commercialize, only 2% become venture-backed, right? So before that, many of them don't even make it to that stage. But even after that money is tipped into them, it could be $500,000, $3 million, $10 million, 75% of them return zero to the investors, right? So in other words, the capital alone is not going to fix the problem. And there's more to the story. And that is why when we started to look at it, I mean, we are investors ourselves, and we started to research the landscape for how the ecosystem is growing these ventures, we first realized there was a basic formula that had something wrong with it. And that basic formula was, if we have some money and we tip it into a team, it will turn into a valuable company, right? So let's just go through many, many teams and find, you know, the good teams with their ideas, and that it will grow. But what happened over and over again was that venture capitalists started saying, hey, there are multiple layers that are needed to be dealt with to grow a company. So at Engenesis, we also look at another few layers. Number one, after investments, is technology. We specialize in product technology because that has massive scale up and massive leverage of value. We also have venture design. This is your strategy. This is your market traction. How do you get those customers so people use your ideas in society? And finally, as you can see, that there's an iceberg picture here. The top three are ones that people see every day, right? They talk about them. But as you go years and years, after 10 years of doing this, you start to realize that these top attributes are not the layers that really make the difference. And we believe that human capital is something like 70+% of the reason why companies fail or succeed, yeah? It's the human beings behind the businesses that generate the value in the end of the day. So through all of these, we'll be sharing with you some of the strategies we've had, some of the stories that we've learned through the process, and we deal with day to day building companies who are, you know, cutting edge and disrupting industries at the moment. So let me jump into the first one of funding and investment. And this is the one that we would say 90% of the time when somebody comes to us saying, hey, I have a great idea and I'd like to talk to you guys at Engenesis. And we say, okay, great, what do you need? 90% of them will say they need capital. If I have the money, if I had some money in my bank, I can go and make my idea a success, yeah? Now, this sounds right, yeah, because obviously if we had the ability to hire people and, you know, have any resources we want, it sounds like that would really help our idea to grow in the market. But let me tell you a story about this group that we met in Melbourne, and they came to us and said, hey, Engenesis, we're looking for $1.5 million to help our venture get off the ground. And we said, okay, great. So tell us about your idea. And they moved through their idea. They said, oh, we've got algorithms for this, and we've already validated this market, and so on. And it sounded very good, by the way. You know, it was very compelling, and we followed the conversation. In about the third meeting, we were already, you know, reasonably excited. We said, well, hold on a second. Tell me about your other investors. And they said, we have about 13 investors. They've invested $1.35 million. And yet we haven't generated $1 of revenue, yeah? We still have years and years to go. And we found that many conversations go this way, right? That people think that they need all of that money to begin with, but sometimes that money can turn into more of a burden, you know, than people think, because they don't know what to do with it. So this is where we draw the following circles, that there is a difference between having resources and being resourceful. This is the fundamental question that we ask them, that after they pitch a lot, and we ask them this question, there's just huge silence. And I invite you to write this down if this is something that you're interested in. The question is, imagine that you have that money in the bank right now. What are you going to do with it? So some people have a few things. They might say, oh, we're going to hire people, or we're going to do some marketing. But in the end of the day, investors are not stupid, right? They have earned their money, and they want to see what you are going to do with it, and they want to know that you've critically thought about it and that you have a plan of attack. Obviously not such a plan that it's all fixed for the next 10 years, but at least something that shows that you are going to use it and have a high efficiency of the capital. So as we go on, you'll also see the other layers that dictate where those funds can be used in an efficient way. The second, let me move into technology and product technology. Yeah. Now, I assume that for most of you, these are the types of companies you will be working with in the future. Yeah. Or if you're not working with already. So here's the first fact that we came across after we heard all of these stories, and that is that 71% of software projects fail, right? They don't get to the level that they were initially intended for. Yeah. I want you to imagine this. Imagine that 10 people paid money to get all of these houses constructed. And there we are 1 year, 2 years later. Out of all the 10, there's only 3 that have been built. And all of the other ones, some of them have nothing built, some of them have just scaffolding. There would be uproar in the street saying, hey, there's something wrong with this industry. Yeah? Now that is the current state of affairs when it comes to building software. Secondly, imagine that the customers could be ready. This is saying that there's a market already. This is saying that you do have the money, and yet the technology, is not being built how it should be, right? So this is a huge concern that we see, and we find that there's a great underestimation of what it takes to turn these ideas into working software products or other even physical products. Now let me share with you just one of our examples, to illustrate this. So another common question we have when people come in with a great idea. So this was someone who had 25 years experience in the food industry. And you can imagine having that much experience in there, they get to see the nuances of, what makes people tick, what are the issues going on with different business owners in that degree. So he came and he said, hey, Engenesis, I have these ideas, how much is it going to cost to build this, right? I'm ready to go. And now, many people would just go ahead with it, right, and build. We said, hold on, slow down. Let's go and firstly do a design and build a UI UX prototype. So what is that? Imagine something like Uber, that you can click all the buttons and it looks like you can get the map, but it doesn't actually call, your cab or your car. Yeah. So he did that, and he had this thing there on his iPad, and then he went to his customers and he said, here, this is what I've had in mind. Yeah. Instead of us going through this level thick of paper documents, we can use one iPad and we can replace the whole process. And instead of taking something like 4 hours of one food safety audit, we can break it down to something like 20 to 30 minutes, right? And when he presented this to his customers, the customers did not say, hey, good idea, good on you. They said, when is it being released? Because we are ready to pay and start using it. Yeah. So through a fraction of the cost of building it, he was able to de-risk his whole venture. And this is already commercialized. It's being used across Australia. Currently, they're talking to Australia's largest catering company, and it touches something like 250,000 meals per year that it prevents food illness. Yeah. And one of the other things he told us to why he was interested in this is today in Australia, 140 people die of foodborne illness, right? So this is a hidden issue that is, killing people even in a developed country such as ours. So this shares with you, just obviously we don't have all the time to go through our whole methodology. We have a methodology called Planned Agile, which we use, taking people step by step to reduce the risk of a software build to literally zero, right? But today what I do want to share with you is that this is a simple thing to do to start to understand what it takes taking these ideas, again, into the industry. Fantastic. So I'd like to now pass it over to the Engenesis CEO and founder, Ashkan Tashfir, and he is going to go through the venture design and strategy and the human capital elements.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Ashkan, and as Ari said, I'm the CEO and founder of Engenesis. So you should have a kind of understanding of what we do, but now I'm going to make it about you guys. So why you should care about entrepreneurship, even if you don't want to start a company. Yeah. So if we can manage to communicate this thing to you, two things to you by the end of this, I think that you're going away with something, learning something out of this whole conversation. One is getting the notion of it is quite crucial to follow a kind of methodology or framework as a guideline when you're building a business, as opposed to just coming up with these random strategies or activities that lots of businesses do, especially startups. The second one is getting the importance of the human capital aspect of businesses. Yeah. If we can take these two things out of this conversation, I think that I'm personally very happy. I hope that you're going to be happy too. So people come to us and say that, okay, so I had a brilliant idea. We built the software, and the software is there, or the value proposition is there, but now can you help us taking it to the market, getting the first customers to start using it? And that's a very, very common one. And like we've seen a lot that people, even like some businesses, particularly one that I'm not going to mention their name, they invested roughly $10 million building this quite sophisticated technology operational management tool platform, and they realized that no one is that interested in that. Here it is that we came up with our framework, Genesis framework. And the one thing I really like to emphasize on is this framework is modeled from reality. Yeah. So some of you, not all of you, you have academic background here because we are in a university. So you know the difference between theory and modeling. Yeah. So we're not making something up. We didn't come up with a series of rules and processes. We didn't invent it, but we discovered it. How? By going through, by studying and doing some research around how successful entrepreneurs and investors operated so far, the ones that are successful. And also we studied the ones that they have failed. And through study, research, as well as our experience building companies, being exposed to failures and success, we came up with this framework. And as you can see, there are three high-level steps: define, build, and scale. So I'm going to quickly just give a very high-level understanding of that to you, but obviously we cannot go through it and then talk in depth with it. As you can see, there are three lines. One on the top is the team or human capital. There is another one is the product and the market. So, and then there are 6 different stages, and they're iterative. So you may come back to look into, like where you were, what sort of things you missed, and then you need to refine it. Yeah. So when we're talking about the human capital, so I'm going to go into the details of it shortly. But basically, we're talking about things like knowledge, experience, skills, and behaviors. Yeah, and when you're talking about the product, so I think that that's the part the majority of people are quite familiar with it. You know, you come up with a value proposition, you build a software, something that you want to deliver. But the whole point here is, it's not just about some money-making venture, yeah? Entrepreneurship is not just that. As a matter of fact, it's like a group of people, we call the team here, a group of people will sit and work on some sort of value, and which is the product or the service, and they deliver it to a number of people, a group of people. We call them market. Now, so many of you, even in this hackathon, you have been working on algorithms, or there are some challenges that you're trying to come up with solution. And I'm pretty sure that you're not just doing it for that $700. So the thing is, the success is not just to coming up with that algorithm, but to put it in place, yeah, to really fix an issue there, solve a part of human beings' problem, and adding value to them in a way that they are happy to give you, exchange money with it. And that's exactly how you make money, yeah? So you give something first, and then you can make money. As an example, for example, Arya was talking about Frank, yeah? It's not just a piece of software, it's not just a business, money-making venture. Actually, in Australia alone, 180 people a year die just because of food poisoning, which is ridiculous, yeah? Something that we can easily avoid it, and we don't. So by bringing up these solutions and helping food facilities or auditors in food safety, we can help, we can literally minimize the amount of death out of food poisoning, yeah? So it's about adding value. So in Engenesis framework, we consider these three lines. So for this is a bit of Engenesis framework. Basically, we call it core value, and this is the thing that normally we take into consideration in the beginning, knowing whom we are serving, the burning pain, the problem that they have, and then the solution that you can bring, and also the existing solutions that are there. Okay, so I kept talking about human capital, human capital, human capital. So what is it? Human capital is a combination of things like the skills that we have in-house in our team, the partners that you may have, but knowledge, experience, behavior. So in traditional HR, they call it behavior. Now, here is the very unique thing about what we do at Engenesis. We just don't see behaviors, but we see being. So what does that mean? Because it's a little bit a stretch. I'm going to go into more details shortly. Let me just skip that. Yeah, so we'll go through that shortly. But let's see, like in a more tangible way, when you're talking about human capital, and like that's important when you're building businesses, what does that mean? Or like a couple of examples. Facebook, as an example, they capitalize on each single person $2 million a year. Like if you divide the revenue they generate by the number of their employees, you will come up with $2 million, which is really good, yeah? So I would like to refer back to that definition that Arya was explaining by John Baptiste, that he said that the definition of entrepreneur is the one who shifts resources from the areas of low productivity and yield to the areas of higher productivity and return. So, for example, for Google is a sort of similar thing, but basically half of that. But it still is really good. Like if you divide them, if you take the revenue that Google generates and divided by the number of their employees, you will come up with $1 million. Now, another example here is Instagram. So when Instagram was sold to Facebook, they only had 13 employees. So a 13 people company with the series of skills that they had, with the knowledge experience, they could create something which was worth $8 billion. Yeah. Okay. So I talked about being. Yeah. Was that strange when I was talking about being? So we came up with this tool named Aurora. We refer to it as the being profile. Simply, we measure ways of being, the ways that the person participate in life, participate in work, contribute into the work that they are doing. So you can go to aurora.com or beingprofile.com, and then you can see, you can read more about it. But very shortly, in a very brief way, I'll explain it to you. So things like authenticity, integrity, peace of mind, responsibility, freedom, self-expression. So these are the type of things that we measure with our tool, Aurora. We realize that for a person to be an entrepreneur or have an entrepreneurial mindset, they require to have a kind of patterns of behaviors. And it's not just the patterns of behaviors, so these behaviors are a kind of, every person would project the manifestation of their being through their behaviors. Yeah. For example, normally a successful entrepreneur needs to have a high score in integrity. They should honor their word. They need to have a high score in responsibility, so they should not feel like a victim majority of the time, but on the contrary, they should be cause in the matter. They should take charge. They should feel in charge of the things that they are doing. And there are some other scores that contribute into that, like, for example, empowerment. Yeah. So if you have any question regarding the being profile, I'm more than happy to answer it later. So these are some screens of our tool, and I think that you would find it interesting. Like I was talking to a couple of you guys, we were talking about internship, and there are some opportunities around this if you really like to be part of this project that we have. Yeah. And as I've promised in the beginning of the, in the beginning of the presentation, so this is the link. If you want to be in touch with us, you just go there, put your email there, and it's our newsletter, and we will contact you if you want to know more about the Being tool, if you want to know more about the entrepreneurship part of it, we can be in touch with you. Awesome. Thank you very much. It was a privilege to stand here.